guys all for coming out on what is, I think, right now, the hottest day of the year. Just wait until next week, but here we are. One of the things I treasure about Sonoma is just how much we all support each other, how much Sonoma supports its own, but how much Sonoma supports the whole world. And Todd here is one of the shining examples of how Sonomans and Sonoma really support the world and just in general bring goodness in here, which is something we all and you know, the thing, I already knew he was a great guy. I already knew he had done wonderful things. And the thing I didn't realize until I cracked open, he was 90 years old. Look it. I am so lucky. Todd obviously knows a lot more about his life than I do, so he's going to tell you about it. I just have to do some boring things first. If you have anything that makes any noise, your cell phone, a watch, a pager, camera, I don't know, whatever makes noise, if you can make sure it's not going to do that during this talk, I'd really appreciate it. If you guys have any cups left, you can bring it to me at the counter and I'll throw it away. There's also a trash can outside. Todd will be signing his books afterwards. The trick is he's going to be signing at a table in the middle of the store. Hard not to say, hey, congratulations, thank you so much, you have a wonderful story, I'm so proud of you. It's really hard not to do that, but we figured out a solve. The books are at the counter, which is in between. So you guys will line up and get the books while he's running over there so he can sign them for you. So with that, if everyone can just give Todd a huge round of applause.
Well, a big hurrah to readers. They do this twice a month for support of writers, and I'm just delighted to see so many faces that I know in different situations in life. And I will say, as far as reading from this book, I got kind of absorbed in my early life, and so then I thought, no. You're talking to people from Sonoma who know you, and maybe you should have a few stories of what life has been like here in Sonoma. So we're going to get to that toward the end of the reading. And if you get impatient, just stomp your foot so I know that I'm going too slow. I want to credit a couple of people. I'm not sure you have all met my wife of about 8 months, Carolyn P. Now it's Carolyn P. Evans. I had a chance to meet her after the reading. And Patricia Hanley has been a super editor, and she calls her a coach, and it really has been a coach. It's getting me to, well, why would you put that in the book? Trying to justify it. And so it's been a team to pull this book forward. Some people ask how long I've been working on it. I would say 5 years, but it really got underway two years ago when I was in Mexico, in Ajijic on Lake Chapala. And they had a library right next to where I was staying, and I spent a whole month there. Every 10 o'clock the library opened, 2 o'clock it closed. I was there religiously getting this thing put together, and then it's taken a lot of modifying from that. But it's been a thrill, and it's a thrill to have it published. There is a hardback. Unfortunately, they've all sold out hardbacks, but there is 5 more coming, apparently, if you really want to get a hardback. So, 90 years old. Living far out in the country, hunting came naturally to my father. The crows that circled the field surrounded our home and made raucous calls and became prime targets. On one occasion in my youth, Dad wounded the wing of a crow and took it hostage. It was unable to fly, so he tied a string around one leg and staked it to post outside our home. I felt sorry for that crow that was grounded, so to speak. He became a decoy out in the woods to attract other crows. And it was a practice that I really felt sorry for that crow. So hunting became a way of life in our home. Dad wanted Whit, my brother, age 10, and me, age 11, to experience every stage of a duck shoot. Chef ready breakfast in the wee hours of the morning. A guide and several helpers suited us up with hip-high boots, warm leather coats, gloves, and rifles. My dad assured me that he had taught his boys to keep the guns pointed to the ground and how to load and release the locks, aim the barrel, and shoot. We marched lines before dawn. Our waders enabled us to reach the blinds, which loosely floated on boards over the water and hid us among the surrounding reeds and cattails. As the light slowly illumined the sky to the north, I alone in my blind could see the silhouettes of ducks flying low while looking for an inviting place to land. Once settled, they called to one another from neighboring ponds, as if celebrating a homecoming. It was a virtual chorus of greetings, perhaps even information about the anticipated bounty in the nearby cornfield. For a time, they avoided our ponds. Dad took out his duck call. Quack, quack. Suddenly, a flock of some 10 ducks headed for our pond. Our guide called out, "Ready at 12 o'clock." They came in so fast, mere shapes in the corner of my eye. Shots started going off from the other blinds around the pond. Then came a straggler, angling in for a landing right over my head. Without any thought, I pulled the trigger. An explosion followed as the shotgun recoiled against my shoulder. The next sound I heard was thrashing in the water, not 10 feet from my blind. The splash of a swimmer trying to regain the power to fly. Our guide shouted out, "Duck down!" "Duck injured," I called out. A couple of Labrador retrievers were now swimming about, retrieving the downed ducks. Before they could get to the injured one, which continued to flap its wings helplessly in the pond outside my blind, the guide appeared. He knew what to do. After wading out to the duck, he broke its neck and handed it to me. "That your first duck?" he asked, as I looked at the sorry, lifeless head dangling from my gloved hand. "Yeah, my first duck," I said. We stayed in our blinds another half hour, but quite clearly all the birds had either settled or been scared off by our artillery display. Even my mother had bagged the duck, although the guides were more eager to congratulate all the hunters than to establish who shot what. In my instance, it was clear. My shot had hit the duck clutched in my arm. The whole mystique of hunting has its own culture. Story from my school days. Yes, I had a carefree upbringing. Secure that my dad had a good regular job, secure that my mother cared for all of us, and if I was sick, our family doctor would appear at the drop of a hat. Friday Farm, that was what we named our lodging, our home, 45 acres, became the ideal backdrop for my curiosity and exploring spirit. I felt less secure in school. Short for my age and not overly talkative, I tended to hold myself in reserve. In the 6th grade, I participated in my first play on a big stage in the school auditorium. It was a Christmas play that reenacted the birth of Jesus, of course. As part of the group of shepherds, our big moment was the shepherd's song. In an early rehearsal, we gathered on stage, and the director schooled us on our cues. Together, we all raised our voices about the light that so suddenly appeared with the angels. The director stopped us, came to on the stage. Terry, that was my nickname at the time, Terry, during the song, would you please just mumble? Just move your lips. What? Just pretend you're singing. The other kids on stage laughed. Okay, let's start again. I felt humiliated. Tearfully, I walked away and sat in the corner until they finished. How come everyone else can sing and I can't? Well, by the end of my life, toward the end of my life, I did some remedial work on that particular lack of hearing that could identify keys and that kind of thing. And my coach, Sheila Whitney, 3 years, worked with me, and now I'm a member of the Vintage House Singers. So I'm enjoying singing so much, so much. So I went to a boarding school in Massachusetts, and then I went to college. And just a minute. Number 2. In the middle of my junior year, my father arranged for his company plane, he was a business executive, to fly me to our family's winter home in Delray Beach, Florida. My parents were upset that the company I was keeping with Quakers had influenced me with radical leanings. I had written my mother often, sharing my views on pacifism and the futility of war. I boarded this plane at about 5 p.m. at the Newark airport. There I sat in my lonesome as the sole passenger, keeping a few rows of seats in lounge company. I was consumed by feelings of privilege, which made me uncomfortable. I quieted my conscience, knowing it was at my father's bidding. It was a stormy flight over the Carolinas. Night fell, a gust of wind and rain and flashes of lightning bounced the 2-engine plane about in the clouds like a basketball on a fast dribble. Had I not known and trusted the pilot, I would have been scared witless. It felt like an omen of what might lie ahead. Stepping off the plane in Palm Beach, the scent of orange blossoms filled my lungs and sweetened the air. There was my mother beaming her welcome. We wouldn't get down to serious talk until the next day. Serious talk it became. We are worried about you, my mother said. These McCarthy trials are going on. How do we know you're not making friends with communists? You mean the Quakers might be communists? We don't know. My father, a reticent man, had been a chemistry major in college and normally preferred that my mother do the talking. But in this situation, he was truly alarmed. As a corporate executive and a respected citizen, he had a reputation to protect. That letter you and your friends wrote in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, it embarrassed us, he said. 2 of my Cleveland friends, students at Princeton, had joined me in a letter to the editor of the Plain Dealer, supporting the right of our debate society to invite Alger Hiss to speak on campus. Alger Hiss, he's a communist, said Dad. Well, the debate society wanted to hear all points of view. Forget that. We don't understand what this conscientious objector matter is all about. It was incomprehensible to my dad that his son believed there were alternatives to war. But even more, not knowing anything about Quakers, he worried about possible associations with communists. I was torn. I knew in my bones that I could never bring myself to shoot at and kill another person. Long hours in the library studying Gandhi and the power of nonviolent resistance had also provided me with fodder for believing in alternatives to war as a way to solve conflict. Spanish Harlem. As many of my fellow students were finding careers in law and medicine and other things, I, as having become a conscientious objector, sought work in service to both a mental hospital and the poor community of East Harlem. In New York City, I began a project to be a project intern with the American Friends Service Committee. My job description focused on organizing volunteer youth projects, but the New York office also wanted to develop a pilot program for revitalizing urban neighborhoods. This goal struck a chord with me. My studies of Gandhi, who identified with the poorest levels of Hindu society, convinced me that a just society needed to account for the situation of the least privileged. One evening, living in New York, I wandered west under the overpass of the New York Central train tracks. I suddenly found myself smack dab in the middle of a Puerto Rican neighborhood. There were bongos on the corner, merengues ringing out from radios, kids in the street playing stickball, girls jumping the squares of hopscotch, scratched in chalk on the sidewalks. I felt like I had stumbled upon a fiesta. Everyone appeared to be abuzz with excitement and expectation. Immediately, I was befriended by a group of preteen boys. They all wanted to know my name and become acquainted. One insisted I meet his mother, Maria, a chubby woman with a moonshine-friendly face. She worked downtown as a nurse and raised 6 children in her railroad apartment. Soon there were, I was part of this Quaker project, and there were other volunteers came to live in this neighborhood. 7 volunteers recruited by the AFSC, living in a 2-block area. What were we to do in this culture that was 90% Puerto Rican, 70% unemployed, and more youth than adults? I began to hear the complaints of tenants angry about the disrepair of their buildings, rat holes, faucets that leak, no heat in winter. One day I spoke to my landlord, who showed up once a month to collect rent. Why don't you let me manage this place? I can make the repairs when they're needed. You're no super, he said. These renters don't know scat. All I hear is they're griping, plumbing broke, locks, the heat. In winter they want to have a sauna in here. I can get cooperation because I'm living here, I said. Oh, he agreed to give me a couple of months as a super. Best case, he said. It was a steep learning curve, taking on the job of a super. Plumbing leaks forced me to learn how to seal pipe joints. Crumbling walls taught me how to plaster and fill rat holes. Starting the furnace, adjusting the thermostat in winter, and ensuring a fuel source presented unfamiliar challenges. Sometimes the landlord didn't pay the oil company and deliveries were precipitously cut off. Rats were a constant concern. An article in the New York Post documented a baby that had been bitten by a rat. The landlord faced a stiff fine. It showed me, as a super, to find the holes, stuff them with paper and steel wool, and coat the hole with plaster. Ed here, where are you? Oh, there, complimented me for learning all these kinds of things, which I had no experience before. But it was the drug addicts who had sat stoned on the stoops that bothered me the most. A very likable fellow named Johnny greeted me whenever we met. His brother Phil, who sat stoned and nodding on the neighbor's front stoop almost every day, struck me as pitiful. Johnny took me aside one day and said he didn't want to be like his brother and intended to get help for himself at a rehabilitation center in Lexington, Kentucky. Can you lend me $50 for the bus ride, he asked. I came up with it. 2 weeks later, I saw Johnny back on the street. I asked him what had happened. A guy got me coming home and he had some hot stuff. Did you have to go along with him? Ah, come on, give me a break. You mean to tell me you never screwed up? I'm not sure Johnny ever went to Kentucky. Naive to the life of drug addiction, I was easily conned. The residents lived with the fear that their rooms would be broken into by addicts and valuables stolen. Living in East Harlem became challenging. A teenager named Beto, who hung out on my home block, distinctly didn't like me. He had a reputation in the neighborhood for delinquency and had spent some time upstate at a correctional farm. One day he visited me in the brownstone while I was sweeping the lobby. Clearly, he had a bone to pick. He took out a jackknife and began to poke holes in the wall of the lobby. Listen, I said, I'm trying to fix this place up, make things look decent for the folks. Beto continued to use his knife to dislodge some of the old wall. Beto, man, I have to protect this property. It's my job. Why don't you put down the knife? I sensed the potential danger of talking to a young man with a knife. This is a good time to be careful and exercise Gandhian nonviolence. Go ahead, call the police on me. I don't want to call the police on you. Beto walked out the door. I followed him and stood on the outdoor landing above the stairs. In a few minutes he returned, this time with a short 2x4 in his hands. Before I could react, he swung the board at me as if he were hitting a home run. The blow landed on the fat of my arm, just below the shoulder. He then ran down the street, probably to tell some of his tough friends he had just delivered his message to the intrusive Diego, gringo. My arm throbbed, muscles stiffened. I felt lucky he hadn't contacted bone. A greater bruise lay in my sad discovery that I could provoke such animosity from anyone. Such warmth of friendship I'd experienced in this Puerto Rican neighborhood. One Sunday, I ventured to the Riverside Cathedral on the Upper West Side and joined a crowd of worshipers celebrating the arrival of spring. Several years had passed since I had attended a Protestant church service, but this worship was anything but standard. The hymns were sung with gusto. Joy of the congregation's contagious. A pastor read this passage from the Song of Solomon. For now the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in the land. So now I'm going to take you to quickly up to a few other pieces of my life. I decided to go and study religion in a seminary, Quaker seminary in Indiana. And at the end of the year, see, I was a Quaker, and Quakers have this form of worship. Most of them have it in this form, where you sit around and somebody gets inspired to speak, stands up and delivers a presentation. And another person may follow a minute or two later with another reflection. Well, I was in this seminary, but the seminary was really training pastors to preach. And so I kind of was an anomaly as a student. And when we got to the end of the 3 years of study, which was, really filling out my sense of what religion was all about, I didn't have an inclination to become a pastor in a church, to preach every Sunday and all that kind of thing. So I, best in the classes I had were in counseling and some psychology. And I went to a retreat near the end of my 3 years, and it was led by a man who had come back from the Young Institute in Switzerland. And he kind of shared what that event meant to him in his life. And when he was speaking, I saw over his head a cross. And two of the arms of the cross were sort of indistinct. The two of them were very, very clear. And this friend of mine who knew more about Jung's psychology than I did said, "Hey, you were seeing a mandala. And I said, yeah, what does it all mean? He said, well, probably it means you have an unbalanced psyche. Two of the arms of the cross are clear and two are not. And this is Jungian theory, to develop a balanced personality and that kind of thing. I thought, wow, this is amazing. Maybe I should go to Switzerland myself. And Jung lived in Zurich, but he had died. And there was an institute that taught his theories. And so that's what I decided to do. I plunged first into learning German so that I could live in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. And I lived with a family in Heidelberg. One evening, my host father, seeing how I struggled with this new language, suggested we go out for a glass or two of wine. I will help loosen your tongue, he said. We went to a wine cellar. With a twinkle in his eye, he engaged me in diverse subjects, which he described as "Wir sprechen über Himmel und Erde," which translated was talk about heaven and earth. My host was right. A glass of wine did wonders for my language. At the end of the summer, as my train wound its way from Germany to Switzerland, I became disillusioned. In my mind, Die Schweiz was a land of steep, precipitous mountains where cows grazed the hills and young men in lederhosen gathered the flocks. Instead, looking out the train window, the land was flat. I disembarked in Zurich and walked out to the street. It could have been Times Square. Ticker tape ads circled the tops of the buildings, the streets filled with lines of waiting taxis, horns blared, commuters rushed past, not a mountain in sight. I found a bed at a nearby hotel. That night I had a strange dream. Some white swans were swimming in a pond. One of them came out of the water and took a run at me as if to attack. I awoke, startled. When I first met with my teacher, Dr. Meyer, in his study, he showed great interest in my dream. A dream of this very graceful, sensuous white swan suddenly on the attack. The aggressive white swan suggesting a potential force of conflict in my psyche. I met with Dr. Meyer twice a week for 2+ years for an hour, either on his sun porch or in his study, which was stacked with volumes of psychology. He asked me to record all my dreams. He read them during our sessions, sitting in a comfortable chair and sometimes smoking his pipe. My job was to free associate about the content. Having this kind of analysis went part and parcel with a course of study at the Jung Institute. I also joined a Scottish Highland dance group. And developed a fondness for a young woman I met there. After a time, I began to date Heidi, the daughter of a Swiss Engadine family. Her father was a climbing guide for an English mountaineering group. Heidi had actually auditioned for the role of Heidi in the Swiss movie of the same name. Her ruddy cheeks and ready smile, a natural to launch a new starlet. Alas, a Shirley Temple type won the role. She worked as a nurse in a nearby hospital, and her sprightly joy in talking about her life and her graceful dancing easily won my heart. While Heidi and I were hiking in the mountains, we learned that the Russians had invaded Czechoslovakia and subverted what was commonly called the Prague Spring, an expression of the country's freedom. Russian tanks could now be seen in the streets. Contact with Western Europe restricted the freedom of expression. I had planned a trip to Prague that fall, having never been in an Eastern European country. Take my time here. Keep going. It was a very meaningful meeting with some people I already knew in Prague, and they were very depressed by the invasion. We went to dinner. I went to dinner with a Martha, who I had already met in Vienna. And when we were sitting there in this restaurant, a young woman sat across from us, dressed in black, as if in mourning. Suddenly, she rose from her seat and shouted at us, "You should be ashamed, you people in America. Don't you see what is happening to my people? Ashamed. I thought you valued democracy. Ashamed." A waiter escorted her from the restaurant and apologized to us for the disturbance. But I understood the frustration of this woman in black, as did Martha. Endurance was at the breaking point. I began thinking it might be time to return to the United States. I realized that my home country had retreated from the beliefs of its founders. Two important leaders had been assassinated, Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King. I wanted to be part of a solution. Okay, so we're gonna skip. We're gonna get to Sonoma now. Let's take a couple of quick jumps. I moved to Long Beach, California, worked in the counseling center. I was very disillusioned because all this training in depth psychology did very little for helping people that had the common psychological problems that you would get in a counseling center. I don't have to enumerate. And so I knew I had to get some more training, deal with different issues of psychological issues. That got me to Northern California, where I enrolled in a program at the San Francisco Theological Seminary with a master's degree in pastoral psychology. It dealt with all Freud and Adler and all different kinds of therapies and all that kind of thing. Got my license as a marriage and family and child counselor. So, but all this time, I had a dream. I'd gone to seminary. I'd explored different ways of being active as a minister, and I really felt like I wanted to. I'd had some good experiences in retreat centers, and I wanted to found a retreat center. And so, my wife, Marge, she was willing to do this. I'd had 2 children, Matt's here, my older son, and Scott, who passed away, and we decided to move to Mendocino County and found a retreat center called Wellspring. And it was I had a hard time selling my parents on this one. It was very rustic. We lived in a cabin, and there were no shelves in the cabin, and there were pots and pans were there, and of course the kids loved it. They could pull the pots and pans out and make noise and make sure we knew they were around. It was, my parents visited, and they saw Marge trekking to the washing machine that was in the main house of the retreat center with the youngest son, Scott, in a chest, what do you call it? Pouch, whatever it is. And Matt in a backpack in the back, pushing a wheelbarrow full of laundry. And they let me know, in some ways, they figured this marriage was not going to last. We had wonderful experiences in the 10 years we lived there. And Marge was not really acclimated to living in the country that much. She was a suburban gal, and she wanted to be in what she called a full-service town. I looked around, and eventually it ended up with us in Sonoma. We arrived in Sonoma in time for Scott to start 4 years of high school. Matt entered as a sophomore. Within a year, Marge supervised the building of our own 3-bedroom house on country land tucked up against the western hills. I felt like I had entered the kind of world where most people live in. Children in school, homes laid out along paved streets, trucks to pick up garbage and recyclables, local newspaper, theater, veterinarians at the ready, hospital or emergency room, feed store, police force, and a variety of restaurants. All at our in front of us. I half wondered if I'd sold out to suburban conformity. I took a year to finish the house designed by my tenant partner in the audience, Vic Conforti. Our builder put every step of the building process on a timeline and amazed us by finishing the job on the exact day he said. In the first year, I began to engage with our new community, first answering a newspaper appeal for a coach to select middle school soccer team, which would compete within the region. Not one to turn down a challenge, I held a tryout and was immediately immersed in all aspects of forming a team. The team wanted to call themselves Roadkill. I thought the name was too provocative. I imagined the opposing team shouting out, "Let's get the Roadkill." We settled on an animal name like the Jaguars. I had coached my boys in soccer for 8 years, and now they were in the hands of trained high school coaches. Approaching Scott's junior year, he asked me if I would mind if he tried out for football. Why would you want to play football? I asked. When I'm running down the soccer field chasing someone, I just want to knock the guy down. That does sound like a football. Sonoma became the ideal place from which to further develop the nonprofit Seeds of Learning. You all have heard probably of it in some way or other. Nicaragua had been a proving grounds. Already one group had built a school. How could Seeds of Learning continue to grow and scale up its accomplishments? In the next 10 years, Seeds of Learning spearheaded projects to build 65 individual schools and expansion of existing schools. As Seeds of Learning developed, over half the volunteers who traveled south were high school age or younger. It's an experience I wish I had experienced when I was at that age. I'm remembering one youth, your daughter, Nicole, on a return flight to the States, she began reading all the promotional literature for gadgets, technology, clothing, modern living. She was dumbstruck by the sudden immersion into a consumer culture so far out of the reach of the people she had grown to know in Nicaragua. From the beginning, I had envisioned Seeds of Learning scaling up its operations and undertaking educational initiatives in other countries. Doors began to open with uncanny synchronicity. I know a pastor in El Salvador, a friend said to me. Maybe he can help you take Seeds of Learning to that country. In the summer of 2005, an eager group of volunteers gathered in the San Francisco airport. Some toting shovels and picks, others with packs full of school materials, art supplies, and soccer balls. Several women volunteered to hold arts and crafts classes. Digging a latrine 10 feet deep in the earth became a side project. We had the fortune to know a very game young volunteer, Annie Bacon, just out of college, who thought nothing of descending into a 10-foot-high ditch to hoist large boulders to the surface. I didn't know then that she would go on one day. To be the executive director. It's a learning. Our first volunteer group stayed on the job for 2 weeks. They were followed by a second group, which raised the concrete block walls to their full height. The trickiest part of the construction became bending rebar, tying together rods of steel with wire. When assembled and filled with cement, the columns would prevent the building from collapsing in the event of an earthquake. For 5 years, Seeds of Learning planned volunteer excursions to those schools in El Salvador. On my last trip there, I was accompanied by some of my dearest friends living in Marin and Sonoma counties. From here to there. We started construction at the home village of our works supervisor, Roberto. When we first arrived at the cluster of mud and wattle homes, all 100 school children and many adults formed a double line through which we walked to hear the mayor's welcome. Such a reception it was. Children cheering our arrival, balloons, confetti, and then a banquet. I'll never forget the walk through the enthusiastic throng of smiling faces with children waving and jumping for joy. Don't you think that? Do people in school today do that? That afternoon, community members and soul volunteers pitched in to start the hard work of digging foundation trenches, preparing the site, and stacking piles of concrete blocks. One volunteer quickly discovered that the younger kids loved rides in the wheelbarrow. Wayne Shockey, are you here? You know, some of you know Wayne. He loaded 5 or 6 kids in his improvised taxi, and off he went to find another stack of blocks that needed transport. The kids, preschoolers and early learners, loved it and clamored for more. Most rewarding was the participation of community members right along with us, making the ubiquitous pyramids of gravel, sand, and cement that we called volcanoes. 5 or 6 locals and volunteers hauled buckets of the mezcla, the mortar, to the wooden scaffolds that circled the planned school. Those working atop the platforms grabbed the buckets and had the satisfaction of laying in the mortar and sitting the blocks in precise order. This was all supervised by Roberto, who insisted upon exact execution of each row. By the end of our 2-week stay, the walls were 8 feet high, defining 6 classrooms. It was time to celebrate with gracious speeches of gratitude, sack race, a water balloon toss, and touching farewells. Another volunteer group would arrive in a few weeks to help finish the school. There is not a time when I was happier than participating with a group on a mission to Central America. A few people say that. Say a yay to that. Yeah. It made me think of the Amish building barns together as a community. On the Seeds of Learning work trip, we worked together in gratifying harmony with Nicaraguans and Salvadorians to build community schools. Most still stand. The joy of the effort lives on. Well, we have some time for some questions. We are on a time limit here, and we will be out of this place by 7:15. So, and if we want to give you a chance to sign the books, that can happen. That will be
There
in the
you
middle
are.
of the store.
You rascal.
Are there particular questions or responses? Dan.
It's not a question, but
an add-on to our daughter looking at the catalog on the plane. And she said, let's look at all the things we don't need. It's just very
Look at all the things we don't need. is what they always say. Yeah, that's the other side of it. Thank you. Listen.
So your life story is so full of a humanitarian and spiritual nature that you acted on, and people don't have an interest with that. And yet when you talk about your parents, it felt like they were trying to pull the reins back a little. But they must have supported you as well, because you needed support to go off and do all these things. But it made me wonder about your grandparents. Were they more like you or more like your parents? You must have had a more adventurous.
So the question is about my grandparents my parents were sort of holding me back, I guess what you're saying.
Well,
My
that's the
grandparents
feeling I
like.
had. Like they wanted you to go forward, but they just also wanted you to do what's traditional and
Yeah.
what they must have experienced in their
Yeah.
lives.
Well, I didn't know either of my grandparents, but I do know that they were very instrumental in the growth of industrial America. Whether it was building steel for the Grand Central Station or what my other grandfather do. Anyway, I think metal, the submarine monitor, he provided the metal. I mean, they were really industrialists. And I didn't know them. They both had died. So I had one lovely grandmother who was really on my side. She called me her favorite grandson. So we're twins. And she's a very sweet person. And another grandmother who was a little more severe. Were you thinking I might have had one?
I was wondering where the impetus for you to be so free to experience your nature. And, it's both spiritual but also adventurous at the same time. It's an unusual combination. And were you able to do that in your son?
I think a question. Did you have a question?
I do have a question. I'm curious, you mentioned that you read the passage about the Swiss psychologist who saw it for 2 years. But it's kind of similar in that vein. It's not like they were really people in the life guiding you towards Nicaragua necessarily. I just, growing up with you, didn't know who did you look up to, and who did you kind of who guided you most on the path that you took? Or who were the people?
I think I had, people talking about having mentors. I had, mentors like a teacher in singing and a mentor in other kinds of things. But I don't think the best mentor was a man named Hugh Wire, who lived in San Anselmo, worked in the church, was in a different role than being a pastor, and he was a great encourager. The only person I can really think about. I think about that. People always talk about this mentor. This is my mentor, and I can't. I'm not sure that played a big role in my life. Kind of.
I have a question about your religion. How much the Quaker religion contribute to whatever you did in your life?
Well, Quakers were noted for finding alternatives to war. Many of them became conscientious objectors to war, and they had, as far as their religious services were going, they were very undogmatic. They were more universalist in religion, and the only thing I would probably still be a Quaker today, but they didn't have any music in their services.
Did you ever, I don't see it, but did you ever have moments as that you thought, maybe I'll just go the more traditional route? Like, did you ever think about kind of shifting away from some of the things that you were pursuing because whatever reason, society, or you wanted to conform? Because you certainly didn't conform to a lot of things. But did you ever have doubts, I guess, and think that maybe you were going into routes or pursuing things that maybe you didn't want to or you shouldn't be into?
So the question is, did I ever think that I should be more of a conformist in things, I guess, more or less. And I don't think so. I have an awful strange thing in me of adventure. And I'm always kind of thinking about the next thing, and you know that too. So, as long as it didn't, fence me in, I was out there.
Well, speaking of adventure, Central America was a violent place at that time. Did you ever feel threatened or insecure there?
There were a couple of times in Nicaragua. So I don't think you were part of this, Annie, but there was a time when the Sandinista government, which was generally thought of as a progressive, people-oriented, help people, they became rather self-possessed. And they wanted to take me and Pat Rickon, who was my really partner in all this work in Nicaragua, to the eastern coast. And it meant a 12-hour boat ride on a river to get there. And then the government of that town, what was the town get called? Bluefield. They were suspicious about who we were, and they called us in and asked questions, and I it's an experience I wouldn't want to do again. And what they did, they were celebrating the end of literacy, and they made a big deal of it. They had a casket and had literacy on it, and they paraded it through. But there was a whole group of people that were not in favor of this, and so they told us, you have to be out of here before dark, which was, I thought, well, that's a warning. But no, as far as the people that plan these trips, they're very careful about being safe. And the woman behind you has many experiences with she could tell her own story about that. Well, I think it's time to one question over somewhere. Yes.
Hi there. I'm curious what sort of advice you might have for young people who have the same tendencies that you did as a young person, or the same interests in peace and nonviolence.
I'm sorry, you're such a distance, I'm not hearing you too well. You want to come up front?
Sure. Thank you for your talk. This is so interesting. I'm enjoying it very much. What I'm wondering is what kind of advice you might have for young people right now in our world who might have the same tendencies and interests that you did at their age for peace and nonviolence.
Well, I think the Quakers would know just what to say to be involved. And of course, there was always the Peace Corps, and I don't think people talk much about that anymore. I guess that goes for people a little older. Our young people out, we have a little observance every Sunday at 5 o'clock, Bring Back Democracy. Are they interested in the politics of the country? Do they seems, have they lost the idea of what democracy is all about? I mean, when few people stop by when we're out there witnessing and say, well, what is talking about democracy, you know? So, I'm not sure I have a really good answer, but I know there's groups that would guide people in that direction.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any end world hunger trips? Any more of those that young people would love about?
So this book ends in 2010, and after, at some point after that, I had retired from Seed to Learning, and I had to feel like I needed to do something else, and started an End World Hunger initiative, and that's developing into a big project in Mexico with indigenous Mexicans. But so I have been active in World Hunger, and a few people here have gone on trips within World Hunger. One to Guatemala, where we helped build sand dams, and some have gone with Antoine to Rwanda and helped there. Another, what is it? What's the name of the
I did go to
organization?
Rwanda. You did go to Rwanda.
Yeah.
Gardens for Health.
Gardens for Health.
I went to Peru.
Oh yeah, and Antoine led a trip to Peru that we've taken recently. So, are you looking for more? Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.